On my birthday, my billionaire grandpa smiled and asked, "So, how's the apartment?" Shocked, I replied, "What apartment?" My parents froze. He turned to them slowly and said, "Then where did the money go?" You know that feeling when your entire world just shatters? When a single, innocent question reveals a betrayal so profound it makes you question every memory, every sacrifice, every ounce of trust you ever had in your own family? That was my 27th birthday. My parents literally froze at the table, their faces drained of all color, as my billionaire grandfather, Walter, fixed them with a stare that could turn blood to ice and asked, "Then where did the money go?" Before that night, I thought I was living a perfectly normal, if a little stressful, life. I was Caitlin, a graphic designer in downtown Chicago, making just enough to scrape by. My two-bedroom apartment, shared with my awesome roommate Olivia, was nothing fancy, mismatched furniture, art prints on the walls, but it was mine. I was proud of making my own way, even with a billionaire for a grandpa. My parents, Harold and Diane, lived in suburban comfort, a 5-bedroom house with a pool, lavish vacations twice a year. I just assumed my dad's senior position and my mom's real estate work paid for it all. They never offered financial help, always preaching about character and working for what you want. When I graduated art school with nearly $70,000 in student loans, they handed me a Dave Ramsey book. Meanwhile, other parents were helping with down payments. I never really resented them, not deeply. I was determined to prove myself. But yeah, there were times, when things got really tight, that I wondered why they seemed so reluctant to help, especially when they'd roll up in a brand new luxury car or brag about their latest kitchen remodel. Grandpa Walter was an enigma. He'd built his real estate empire from scratch, a stern, intimidating figure who rarely showed up at family gatherings. But somehow, he always had this soft spot for me. When we did talk, he'd actually listen, asking thoughtful questions about my design work. My cousin Natalie was the only one who seemed to bask in the family wealth, flaunting a trust fund and endless exotic trips on social media, always making sure I knew the difference in our situations. The week before my birthday? It was brutal. My design agency lost a huge client, and I was laid off. Just 2 months of savings, panicking about rent, frantically job searching in a cutthroat field. So when my parents insisted on a fancy birthday dinner, I tried to say no, to suggest something simple. But they were adamant, saying 27 was special. Looking back, their insistence now makes a twisted kind of sense. There had been signs, little things I'd brushed aside. My dad shutting down talk of a master's degree because I already had enough debt. My mom quickly changing the subject whenever I mentioned financial struggles. Hushed phone calls that stopped the moment I entered a room. That weird tension whenever Grandpa Walter came up. A few months earlier, I'd caught my mom looking at properties in Panama online. "Just daydreaming," she'd said, slamming her laptop shut. My dad had even made comments about how we might not see each other as often because they were planning more travel. That morning, Olivia gave me a handmade card and a plant I'd been eyeing. She knew, better than anyone, how hard I worked. As I got ready for dinner, she helped me piece together a decent outfit from my limited wardrobe. I had no idea that in a few hours, everything I thought I knew would be shattered, or that all my years of struggle had been completely unnecessary. As I put on my only good earrings, I was about to discover the most painful betrayal imaginable. The restaurant was opulent. Chandeliers, crisp white linens, menus with no prices, immediately uncomfortable. My simple black dress and 3-year-old heels felt totally out of place. My mom was draped in a designer outfit I'd never seen, with a necklace that probably cost more than my rent. My dad wore an expensive suit. The conversation was forced, stilted. They asked superficial questions about my job search, then quickly pivoted to safe topics. Their gifts were a designer wallet and scarf, beautiful, but strangely modest for this place. My mom even started a lecture about financial responsibility. I was half listening, nodding along to one of my dad's college stories, when the entire atmosphere in the restaurant shifted. Suddenly, everyone straightened. Staff became hyper-attentive. I turned, and there he was, Grandpa Walter. He cut an imposing figure at 82, tall and straight-backed, in a suit that probably cost my yearly salary. My parents froze, mid-sentence. Fear flashed in their eyes. My dad nearly knocked over his water glass standing up. "Walter, this is unexpected," he stammered, his voice higher than normal. My grandfather ignored him completely, his stern face softening as he looked at me. "Happy birthday, Caitlin," he said, kissing my cheek. His expensive cologne, leather and cedar, filled my senses. 27 years. Hard to believe. "Thank you, Grandpa," I replied, genuinely touched. He took the empty seat beside me. "I wanted to check in on how things are going," he said, his intelligent eyes missing nothing. "Jennifer tells me the quarterly reports for your investment portfolio look strong. The trust should be performing well." I blinked. Asterisk investment portfolio? Trust, asterisk a slight furrow appeared between his eyebrows. "Yes, the trust fund established when you were born. You turned 25 2 years ago, so everything should have been transferred to your control by now." He said it like it was common knowledge. My parents were suddenly very interested in their plates. My mom's knuckles were white around her fork. "I think there might be some confusion," I said slowly, looking between them. "I don't have a trust fund." Walter's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened. "Of course you do. Your cousin's as well, though yours was the largest. 5 million initially, plus growth, managed by your parents until your 25th birthday when control was to transfer to you. The restaurant around us faded. $5 million. A trust fund I never knew about. It made no sense. And the apartment in Gold Coast," Walter continued, his voice still pleasant but now fixed on my parents. "Is it comfortable?" I selected that building specifically for the security and lake views. "What apartment?" I whispered. The silence that followed was deafening. My father was pale. My mother looked sick. Walter's face remained calm, but there was a dangerous stillness to him, like the moment before a storm breaks. "You don't know about the apartment," he stated, not asked. "The 2-bedroom corner unit in the lakeside tower? Purchased 2 years ago as your 25th birthday present?" I shook my head slowly, my mind racing. Walter turned to my parents with deliberate slowness, his voice dropping to a quiet tone that was somehow more frightening than if he'd shouted. "Then where did the money go?" My father started to speak, a tremor in his voice. "Walter, there's been a misunderstanding. We can explain everything." "I sincerely hope so," my grandfather replied, his tone making it clear he didn't believe a word. He turned to his assistant, Jennifer. "Please call Stanley and have him meet us here immediately." "Already done, sir," Jennifer replied, efficient as ever. He was at a dinner nearby and should arrive within 10 minutes. "I've also contacted security at the office to pull all relevant financial records." Other diners were openly staring now, the drama at our table apparently more interesting than their expensive meals. My mother reached for my hand across the table, but I pulled away. A sick feeling churned in my stomach. "Caitlin, sweetheart, this isn't how we wanted to tell you." "Tell me what?" I demanded, my voice rising despite myself. "That I have a trust fund and an apartment I never knew about, or that somehow you kept them from me?" My father glanced nervously around. "This isn't the place to discuss family matters." "I agree," Walter said coldly. "Jennifer, please arrange for a private room." He turned to me, his expression softening slightly. "Caitlin, I promise you will get answers tonight. All of them." As Jennifer spoke quietly to the manager, I sat in stunned silence, trying to reconcile years of financial struggle with what I'd just learned. Why? What had they done? And how would I ever trust them again? The private dining room felt isolating, with dark wood paneling and a long, imposing table. Walter sat at the head, me to his right. My parents across from me, looking utterly trapped. Jennifer stood near the door, tablet ready. We were soon joined by Stanley Thornton, my grandfather's longtime attorney, a balding man with sharp eyes. He placed a leather briefcase on the table. I took the liberty of bringing the original trust documents, as well as the most recent financial statements. Walter nodded. Good. Let's start at the beginning. For Caitlin's benefit. Stanley cleared his throat and addressed me directly. When you were born, your grandfather established a trust fund in your name with an initial deposit of $5 million. The terms were straightforward, managed by your parents as trustees until your 25th birthday, then full control transfers to you. Expenditures before 25 could only be for your education, health, and general welfare, all documented and approved. I stared at him, speechless. And no one thought to tell me about this? Your parents were instructed to inform you about the trust when you turned 18, Stanley replied, glancing at them. Based on your reaction, I gather that didn't happen. It did not, Walter confirmed, his voice tight with controlled anger. Nor apparently did the transfer of assets at 25. He turned to Stanley. What is the current value of Caitlin's trust? Stanley pulled documents from his briefcase. According to the most recent statement from 3 months ago, the trust had grown to approximately $8.3 million. This includes the original principal plus investment growth, minus authorized expenditures for college tuition and the purchase of the Gold Coast apartment 2 years ago. $8.3 million, the number seemed impossible. While I was working overtime, skipping meals, panicking about rent, there had been millions of dollars that belonged to me. I want to see proof of all withdrawals from the trust over the past 5 years, Walter said. As the attorney produced more documents, my father finally spoke. Walter, we can explain. There were investments that didn't perform as expected. The money is just temporarily allocated elsewhere. Allocated where, exactly? Walter asked with dangerous calm. My mother jumped in, tears in her eyes. Harold, just tell the truth. There were some financial difficulties after the recession. We had to make some adjustments. By stealing from your daughter? Walter's voice was ice cold. It wasn't stealing, my father protested weakly. We are her parents. We were looking out for her best interests. I found my voice then, rising, raw with disbelief. By letting me struggle with student loans and a tiny apartment? By watching me stress about making rent while you bought new cars and went on luxury vacations? How, exactly, was that in my best interest? Jennifer quietly placed a glass of water in front of me. I hadn't realized I was shaking until I tried to pick it up and nearly spilled it. Stanley had been examining the records, a frown deepening on his face. There appeared to be numerous unauthorized withdrawals, beginning approximately 7 years ago. Large sums transferred to personal accounts belonging to Harold and Diane. He looked up, his expression grim. Based on my preliminary review, it appears that all but approximately $300,000 has been diverted from the trust. The room went silent. $8 million, reduced to $300,000. I felt physically ill. Where is the money now? Walter asked, his calm voice belying the fury in his eyes. My father looked down at his hands. Some of it went to pay off our mortgage. Some for cars, renovations to the house, investments in Diane's real estate business. Vacations, my mother added quietly. The house in Florida. Memories flashed, painful in their new context. My parents declining to help with my security deposit, telling me student debt built character. My mother showing off her new Mercedes while I took the bus. All while they had access to millions. You let me struggle, I said, my voice barely a whisper. All those years, all those sleepless nights worrying about money. You watched me work 2 jobs in college. You saw how stressed I was about being laid off last week. And you had my money the whole time. You were living off my trust fund while letting me think I was on my own. It wasn't like that, my mother insisted, tears streaming. We always intended to pay it back. Things just got out of hand. Out of hand? I repeated, incredulously. You stole nearly $8 million from me. Walter placed a steadying hand on my arm. Jennifer, please call Detective Ramirez. I believe he's still with the Financial Crimes Unit. Walter, no, my father exclaimed. There's no need to involve the police. This is a family matter. Theft is a criminal matter, Walter replied coldly. Particularly at this scale. Please, my mother begged. We can fix this. We can sell the house, the cars, pay it back. Walter looked at me. Caitlin, this is ultimately your decision. They stole from you. Press charges or not, it's your call. I looked across the table at these people, my parents, whom I had trusted implicitly my entire life. The shock was giving way to a deep, aching sense of betrayal that I knew would never fully heal. I need time to think, I managed to say. I can't process all of this right now. Walter nodded. A reasonable request. He turned to Stanley. In the meantime, I want all their assets frozen. Nothing moves without my approval. And I want a full forensic accounting of every penny that left that trust. Already initiated, Jennifer said. The team will work through the night if necessary. And the apartment? Stanley asked. Have the locks changed immediately, Walter instructed. New keys to be given only to Caitlin. My father made one last desperate attempt. Walter, be reasonable. Where are we supposed to go? My grandfather fixed him with a stare that could have frozen fire. You have a 5-bedroom house purchased with stolen money. Enjoy it while you can. The real estate fraud unit will be particularly interested in how a property purchased with trust fund money was titled in your names. Nothing would ever be the same after tonight. The foundations of my life had been revealed as lies. The car ride home was silent, suffocating. I declined Walter's offer to stay at one of his properties, needing the familiar comfort of my own shabby apartment. I watched my parents shrink on the sidewalk as the taxi pulled away, suddenly looking small and old in the harsh street light. When I walked through my apartment door, Olivia took one look at my face and knew. She guided me to the couch, wrapped a blanket around me, and waited. My parents stole $8 million from me, I finally said, the words sounding absurd even as they left my mouth. I told her everything, the trust fund, the apartment, the years of unnecessary struggle. As I spoke, the shock gave way to a bone-deep anger I'd never experienced. I applied for food stamps last year, I choked out. I was eating ramen 4 nights a week to save money, and they were using my trust fund to remodel their kitchen and buy luxury cars. Olivia held my hand tightly as I cycled through shock, rage, and grief. My phone buzzed constantly with their texts and calls, which I ignored. The next morning, Jennifer called with updates. Walter's legal team was moving fast. The Florida house, their primary residence, both cars, all purchased with my trust money. A forensic accountant was tracking every withdrawal. Preliminary findings indicate approximately $300,000 remains of the original trust, Jennifer explained. Most of the money went to real estate purchases, luxury items, and some high-risk investments that performed poorly. The days blurred. I took sick leave, unable to focus on job searching. Walter sent a car each day to take me to meetings with attorneys, financial advisors, and eventually, a therapist specializing in family trauma. A week after my birthday, we discovered my parents had purchased plane tickets to Panama 3 days before my birthday dinner. They'd been planning to flee immediately after, clearly realizing Walter might discover their deception. The only reason they hadn't left? They needed to maintain appearances until after my birthday, knowing Walter might attend. The extended family fractured along predictable lines. My father's siblings defended him, calling Walter an overreactor. My mother's side was more divided. Her sister called me directly to apologize. The most surprising ally was Natalie. She showed up at my apartment unannounced, looking unusually subdued. I always wondered why Uncle Harold and Aunt Diane lived so well when Dad's and our trust funds were basically the same size, she admitted, sitting uncomfortably on my worn couch. I guess now we know. Natalie's trust had been properly managed, but was much smaller. She'd been careful, just flaunting a more modest lifestyle than it appeared online. I was always jealous of how close you seemed with your parents, she confessed. My parents were honest about money, but never really there for me emotionally. I thought you had loving parents and were being modest about your wealth. I never imagined they were stealing from you. That conversation was the beginning of an unexpected friendship, a bright spot in the darkness. The legal proceedings moved relentlessly. Walter's team recovered just over $1 million, a fraction of what should have been mine. The house in Florida and their primary residence were both seized, along with cars, a boat, and my mother's extensive jewelry collection. Through it all, my parents' desperate attempts to contact me shifted from explanations to outright begging. My father called from a hotel room, claiming they had nowhere to go. My mother sent long emails, insisting everything they did was ultimately for my benefit, though she never explained how their luxury lifestyle helped me. The media eventually caught wind, a small piece in a business publication hinting at significant misappropriation of trust fund assets by close family members. I deleted all my social media. The worst part was the constant, gnawing guilt. Had I driven them to this? Should I have noticed? Was I overreacting? My therapist explained it was a common response for victims of familial betrayal. But understanding the psychology didn't make the feelings any less real. 3 weeks after my birthday, Walter invited me to dinner at his penthouse. It was surprisingly warm and comfortable despite its luxury. He fixed us both drinks, dismissing the staff for privacy. I want you to know that none of this is your fault, he said, looking at me directly. Your parents made their choices. They betrayed not only you, but the trust one placed in them. I keep thinking I should have known, I admitted. There were signs. You had no reason to suspect your own parents of stealing from you, Walter replied firmly. Especially when you didn't even know the money existed. That night, he showed me photographs I'd never seen, my grandmother, Walter as a young man, my mother as a child. Family is complicated, he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. Your grandmother and I didn't always see eye to eye on how to raise your mother. I was often too strict, too focused on building the business. Perhaps if I had been different, your mother might have developed a healthier relationship with money. It was the closest thing to vulnerability I'd ever seen from him. It helped me understand that the betrayal had layers beyond my own pain. They hadn't just stolen from me, they'd betrayed the father who had tried to secure his granddaughter's future. 1 month after my birthday, I finally agreed to meet my parents for legal mediation. They looked visibly aged, gaunt. My mother's hands trembled. They were dressed in modest clothes I didn't recognize. The conference room felt intimidatingly large. Walter sat beside me, flanked by his legal team. My parents had a single, nervous-looking lawyer. The financial forensics team presented their findings with clinical precision, charts detailing the systematic draining of my trust over 7 years. What began as small borrowing had escalated to major withdrawals, funding their house, cars, vacations, my mother's failed real estate agency, my father's disastrous day trading. As the evidence mounted, my father grew defensive, my mother stared at the table, wiping tears. When the presentation concluded, Walter spoke directly to them. The forensic accounting is complete. We know exactly where every dollar went. The only question remaining is whether this proceeds as a civil matter or whether criminal charges will be filed. My parents' attorney cleared his throat. My clients are prepared to cooperate fully. They understand the gravity of their actions and wish to make amends to the extent possible. Amends? I repeated, my voice cracking, speaking for the first time. You stole my future. You watched me struggle while you lived off money that was meant for me. How, exactly, do you plan to make amends for that? My father couldn't meet my eyes. Caitlin, we never meant for things to go this far. It started small, just borrowing a little to get through a rough patch. Then it became easier to take a little more. We convinced ourselves we deserved it, my mother added quietly. For raising you, for all the sacrifices we made as parents. We told ourselves we would pay it back before you ever needed to know. And the apartment? I asked. The one Grandpa bought for me 2 years ago. What was your plan there? They exchanged guilty glances. My father sighed heavily. We were renting it out. The income was going into our account. The betrayal felt fresh all over again. While I shared a cramped apartment, they collected rent on a luxury property that was supposed to be mine. Walter placed a steadying hand on my shoulder before addressing my parents. Here are your options. Option 1, you sign over all remaining assets purchased with trust fund money, cooperate fully with recovery efforts, and agree to a structured repayment plan for what cannot be recovered immediately. In exchange, Caitlin agrees not to press criminal charges. My parents nodded eagerly. Option 2, Walter continued, his voice hardening, you continue to obfuscate and defend your actions, in which case we proceed with criminal charges for fraud, embezzlement, and theft. The evidence is overwhelming. You would both face significant prison time. We choose option 1, my father said quickly. We'll cooperate completely. Walter looked to me. Caitlin, the decision is yours. I studied them, these people who had raised me, tucked me in at night, cheered at my graduations. These same people who had systematically stolen my inheritance. The conflicting emotions were overwhelming. I don't want them in prison, I finally said. But I want every penny recovered that can be recovered. And I want them to acknowledge exactly what they did. Not just to me, but to the entire family. The legal details were worked out over the next several hours. My parents signed document after document, transferring assets. By the end of the day, I legally owned their house in Florida, which would be sold. Arrangements were made to liquidate as many of their possessions as possible. When the attorneys stepped out, I found myself alone with my parents. Why? I asked simply. I want to understand how you could do this. My mother reached for my hand, and this time, I didn't pull away. We got caught up in a lifestyle we couldn't really afford, she said. Your father made some bad investments early in our marriage, and we were always trying to catch up, to keep up appearances. When we had access to your trust, it seemed like an easy solution. Just a little to help us get ahead. But it never stopped. We have a problem with money, my father admitted, looking truly ashamed for the first time. With spending, with status. We need help. Professional help. That doesn't excuse what we did to you, but maybe it helps explain it. It wasn't enough. No explanation could ever be enough. But it was a start. A tiny crack in the wall of betrayal. 2 weeks later, I moved into a modest one-bedroom apartment, purchased with part of the recovered funds. It wasn't the luxury Gold Coast property that should have been mine, but it was mine, free and clear, no mortgage or rent. Walter had helped me select it, insisting on security and a good location. With his guidance, I began learning about financial management. The recovered assets, including the Florida house and various liquidated possessions, amounted to just over $1 million, a fraction of what the trust should have been worth, but a life-changing amount for someone who'd been living paycheck to paycheck. A new job opportunity came through a connection of Walter's, a position at a respected design firm with better pay and advancement. While I was initially hesitant about nepotism, Walter pointed out he only got me the interview, earning the position was entirely my achievement. As spring turned to summer, I established new routines and boundaries. Limited contact with my parents, brief phone calls, but no visits. They had moved into a small rental apartment and were both in therapy for financial addiction, a term I'd never heard but that accurately described their behavior. Walter and I grew closer, our weekly dinners a fixture. He taught me about investments and business, and I began to see past his gruff exterior to the complex, caring man beneath. Jennifer, surprisingly, became a friend and mentor, sharing stories about Walter and helping me navigate career planning. Most unexpected was the reemergence of Thomas, a college friend I'd lost touch with. He reached out after seeing me at a coffee shop near my new apartment. Our reconnection felt like finding an anchor in stormy seas. He had no connection to my family drama, no preconceived notions. With him, I could just be Caitlin. As summer faded into fall, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: hope. Not just for financial stability, but for rebuilding a life that was authentically mine, founded on truth rather than deception. 6 months after the revelation, I was thriving in ways I never could have predicted. My position at the design firm had evolved. I was leading a small team on a major rebranding project. Walter had helped me establish a proper financial foundation. The $1.2 million was carefully invested, with a portion for immediate security. I had a retirement account, real health insurance, and an emergency fund that could sustain me for a year. For someone who'd counted pennies for so long, the security was almost disorienting. I still hesitated before making simple purchases. The habits of financial anxiety were deeply ingrained. My parents continued to struggle with the consequences. They downsized dramatically, my father taking a position several steps down from his executive role, my mother working as an administrative assistant after surrendering her real estate license. The social fallout was perhaps the hardest adjustment. Former friends distanced themselves, and they were no longer invited to the country club events that had once defined their social calendar. After months of limited contact, I agreed to meet them for coffee. They arrived early, visibly nervous. "We've been working with our therapist on making amends," my mother explained, her hands wrapped tightly around her coffee cup. "Not just to you, but to Walter, to ourselves. We understand we can't undo what we did. We're establishing boundaries with money," my father added. "Separate accounts, strict budgets, accountability partners. It's like being in recovery from any other addiction." I listened more than I spoke, observing the humility, the absence of designer labels and status symbols that once seemed essential to their identity. Before we parted, my mother hesitantly asked if we could establish regular contact, perhaps a monthly lunch. I agreed to consider it, unwilling to commit, but no longer completely closed to the possibility of a carefully constructed relationship. Walter suffered a minor health scare in early fall, a warning about his blood pressure. It softened him further, making him more reflective about family. "Your grandmother always said that family was worth fighting for," he told me during one of our dinners. "Not worth sacrificing your self-respect or safety, but worth the effort of understanding and forgiveness when possible." I was learning from Walter not just about money, but about resilience. He'd been deeply hurt by my parents, yet he remained a steady presence, never letting his disappointment in them affect our relationship. With Walter's encouragement, I started a small side business in graphic design consulting, working with startups. The work was challenging, rewarding, allowing me to build something entirely my own. My confidence grew professionally and personally. Therapy sessions evolved into valuable tools for examining patterns and building healthier relationships. I was learning to trust my own judgment again, to recognize I was a victim not because of my failures, but because those I trusted had made terrible choices. An unexpected development came 6 months to the day after my fateful birthday. Walter arranged a surprise dinner in a private dining room at an even more exclusive restaurant. But this time, the atmosphere was entirely different. When I arrived, I found not just Walter, but Jennifer, Stanley, Natalie, and even Thomas, all gathered to celebrate what Walter called my half-birthday. 6 months ago, your life changed in ways no one could have predicted, Walter said, raising a glass. Tonight, we celebrate not what was lost, but what you have built from the ashes. After dinner, Walter presented me with a small box, a key and a deed to a new apartment. Modest, but secure, with a short commute. The Gold Coast property was sold as part of the recovery efforts, he explained. This one is entirely yours, purchased with recovered funds, but selected specifically for your current life, not the one that was taken from you. The gesture moved me to tears, not for its material value, but because it represented a clean break, a fresh start untainted by betrayal. My relationship with Natalie had blossomed into genuine friendship. We discovered shared interests, complementary personalities. She even invested in my side business. I always thought you had the perfect family, she confessed. It's strange how we envied each other for things that weren't even real. Thomas had become more than a friend. Our coffee meetings evolved into dinner dates and long conversations. He had been present through the worst of the aftermath without trying to fix or minimize my pain, just offering steady support. When he kissed me for the first time, walking along the lakeshore near my new apartment, it felt like crossing a threshold into a part of my life untouched by the betrayal. Here was something entirely new, built on a foundation of honesty from the beginning. I even began using a portion of my recovered funds to establish a small mentorship program for young designers from disadvantaged backgrounds. Helping others find their creative path, facing financial barriers, brought a sense of purpose that transcended my personal experience. As fall turned to winter, I realized that while the betrayal would always be part of my story, it no longer defined my daily existence. I was building something new, something authentic from painful truth rather than comfortable lies. 1 year after the birthday that changed everything, I found myself in a place I never could have imagined. Not just financially secure, but emotionally stronger, with clearer boundaries and deeper, more authentic relationships than before the betrayal. The healing journey wasn't linear. There were still days when anger would surge, when the memory of those years of unnecessary struggle felt fresh and raw. But those moments came less frequently now, subsumed by the full life I was building. My parents and I had established a cautious reconciliation process. We met monthly for lunch, with clear boundaries. They showed genuine remorse, continued their therapy, and made small but consistent restitution payments. I never thought I would sit at a table with them again without feeling rage, I admitted to my therapist. It's not forgetting, or even complete forgiveness yet, but it is something like peace. Walter's financial education had transformed my relationship with money. I managed my investments with confidence, balancing security and growth. The remaining trust funds, though far smaller, provided long-term stability. Walter had experienced another health scare, more serious than the first. The fragility of his mortality brought perspective. Despite everything, he was still my grandfather and my parents' father. The time we had together was limited and precious. During his recovery, I spent hours at his bedside, learning about his early years, his regrets, his triumphs. These conversations deepened my understanding not just of him, but of the complex family dynamics that had contributed, though never excused, my parents' actions. My design career flourished. My side business grew to the point where I was considering pursuing it full-time, hiring junior designers and a business manager. The mentorship program expanded. Watching those young designers grow brought a satisfaction unlike anything I'd experienced. Thomas and I grew steadily closer, our relationship built on transparency. He spent most nights at my apartment, our lives intertwining naturally. "You know what amazes me most about you," he said one evening as we cooked dinner, "how you've taken something that could have made you bitter and turned it into growth instead." My apartment truly became my home, filled with art and books that reflected my taste. It was modest compared to what might have been mine, but it was fully mine in a way the Gold Coast property never would have been. Natalie and I had developed a genuine friendship. The artificial competition gone, replaced by mutual support. She even joined the board of the mentorship program. On the anniversary of the revelation, I hosted a small gathering at my apartment. Walter was there, looking frilier but still sharp. Natalie, Thomas, Jennifer, and close friends from work. Notably absent were my parents, not because they weren't invited, but because they understood this milestone was not one they should be part of. As we shared a meal, I looked at these people who had become my chosen family and felt a surge of gratitude. A year ago, I thought my life was destroyed, I said, raising my glass. What I've learned since then is that when the foundation is revealed to be false, you have the opportunity to build something true in its place. Walter nodded, his eyes bright. To truth, he said, simply, raising his glass to meet mine. To truth, the others echoed. Later, after everyone had gone, and Thomas remained, helping me load the dishwasher in comfortable silence, I reflected on the deeper lessons. Financial wealth, while providing security, wasn't the most valuable currency. Trust, authenticity, and self-knowledge were far more precious, and much harder to rebuild once broken. Forgiveness, I learned, wasn't a single act but a process, one that didn't require forgetting or excusing, but eventually lightened the burden of anger. Most importantly, I learned that while we can't choose what happens to us, we have absolute sovereignty over how we respond. Over what we build from both gifts and wreckage. The betrayal would always be part of my story, a chapter one couldn't erase. But it would not be the defining chapter. Merely the one that forced me to take control of the narrative and write the rest with intention and authenticity.